All right, guys. The video I did talking about teaching got more views than my normal videos do. So here's another serious video. And it's going to be slightly related to that one. This one's about knowledge, intelligence, wisdom. Is there a difference? Is it important? Does it matter at all? Slightly themed around a comment I got. Shout out to someone for giving me a comment. I forget your name. It starts with a W, I think. There's some weirdness over whether or not intelligence is the same thing as wisdom, or is one more important than the other? What even is the difference? Which one should we have? You get it. I feel like back in the day, I guess they thought that the two things were different. Plato obviously has a different point of view. In Plato, the virtues are all united. So being strong is the same as being just, is the same as being wise, is the same as being smart, intelligent. I haven't entered the word smart into the conversation yet, but whatever, I'll get to it. And in Plato, there's sort of a definition of being wise, sort of, which the commenter tried to put at the beginning of their thing. They said, "To know is to know that you know nothing, some old smart guy." Which is ironic. The person who allegedly said something close to that is Socrates. He did not think he was smart. That's kind of the whole point of why he even said that. His whole thing is that he did not think he was smart. That was what differentiated him from everyone else. The Oracle at Delphi, who's this really important person that everyone in the ancient world, listens to. Someone came to the Oracle at Delphi and asked if anyone in Athens was wiser than Socrates. And they said, no one is wiser than Socrates. So then Socrates was like, what? What are you talking about? I'm not wise at all. I don't know a single thing. And then eventually he figured out, well, everyone else thinks that they know things. And in that, they're less wise than me because I'm more humble. But remember, in Plato, all the virtues are the same. So because Socrates is humble, he is also more wise. That's because he's more virtuous in general. An alternate viewing, though, of what the Oracle said is that no one's more wiser than Socrates, meaning everyone's just as wise as Socrates. So as I'll get into later when I discuss whether or not any of this is important, ask yourself, well, if no one's any different than Socrates, why bother talking about Socrates? Meaning, why bother talking about wisdom if we're all a bunch of know-nothings? But that wasn't the actual quote. Socrates did not say, to know is to know you know nothing. What he said was, I was conscious of knowing practically nothing. And this is all in respect to wisdom. So not to know is to know you know nothing, but to be wise is to know you know nothing, which doesn't make a difference for Plato, but it might make a difference for us because there's this big kerfuffle about whether or not wisdom and intelligence are the same thing. So intelligence is book smarts, which is knowledge from a book, and then wisdom is street smarts, meaning knowledge that you get from having experience. So is there any real difference to be made between those? Shouldn't we just be talking about knowledge in general? And if we're talking about schooling, is wisdom really important at all? Because schooling is probably just for book smarts, right? I mean, that's usually what we think of. If we wanted people to be wise and we thought wisdom was life experience, you probably want to keep them in the same building every day for 13 years. You would probably make them go live and do things outside of a school if you wanted them to be wise. So it kind of seems like if we were going to separate the two, that schools are about intelligence. To a normal person, there's really, like I said, there's really not much of a point in making a difference between the two of them because both of them are knowing, both of them are knowledge. So why even bother talking about it? And this is where the word smart comes from, because it kind of seems, especially from the comment, kind of seems like, I mean, you might as well just treat them like they're the same. Intelligence and wisdom are both smartness. So however smart you are is intelligence plus wisdom. If we're going to make any sort of metric, that was the other question, is what's the metric of how smart someone is? I guess it would be wisdom plus intelligence, if we're going to make a nice definition that most people can agree to. So is knowing something important? And if it is, maybe then we can talk about wisdom and intelligence. Which smarts should we have? Either version of smarts, either wisdom or intelligence, they can both get taken away from you pretty quickly. If you live your whole life thinking one way, and then it turns out things aren't the way you thought. As an example of this, if I live in a village where everyone hates each other, then my wisdom is probably going to amount to something like, everyone hates each other, and here's what you should do about it. And that's my wisdom. Meanwhile, if you live in a place where people are nice to each other, your wisdom is probably going to amount to be like, everyone is good at heart, and we should all get along. You know, your wisdom is probably going to be something like that. But then if either person moves to the opposite place, suddenly your wisdom is not too relevant. Sort of same deal with intelligence. If you're living your whole life using book smarts that are 2,000 years old, Plato, not too useful, are you? But even older than that, like let's say you live your whole life from the book smarts of Greek mythology. We'll stay in Greece for the example. And then you come to science land, which is what we live in the future. We live in science land, where doctors can take all these things and do extremely crazy things with them that Greek mythology would not assume you can do. Your book smarts aren't that useful. So your book smarts kind of depend on what book you read. And books are wrong sometimes. Something I neglected to mention, that there's sort of a third camp, which is kind of a thing entirely on its own from what I've been talking about, like intelligence versus wisdom-wise. In this video, I'm mostly talking about stuff that you learn, like at a school. And my main point was that most of it is assumptive, meaning you have to assume that it's correct, and also that it's environmental, that you're only going to use it within a certain environment. If you're living in Portugal, how worth it is to know the language English? Probably not at all, unless you're going to be dealing with people who speak English, which in the modern world, you're probably going to do that because entertainment is majority English. Sorry, guys, but we did it. We conquered it. And also business. That's something that people from non-English speaking countries will say, is that you kind of need English to do business. Because we're such a big importer, especially in America, that you kind of need to know how to talk to them if you're a productive non-English speaking country. My main point, though, is that things that you learn, especially at a school, are usually, and especially for how prolonged the learning of them is in schooling right now, it's extraneous. You're not going to need to know that much about a topic. Like, how important is it to know that there are homophones and what they're called? And you don't need to know that they're called homophones. If you, in normal, everyday speaking English, without formal learning, just find out that there's something called an ant, the animal. Also find out that you call your aunt Aunt Jemima, your aunt. Then you don't really need to know what it's called. You don't need to. When was the last time you talked about homophones? I can't even think of any academic reason you would need to know homophones. Like, obviously a linguist needs to classify words. But that's so extraneous. That's so far and above what normal people need to know. Knowledge should be on a need-to-know basis. And I will talk later in the video about how, schools are against that sort of idea. all the knowledge that I've been talking about so far is assumptive, meaning you have to assume that it's something you should know in order to care about it. And otherwise, the knowledge has completely no importance at all whatsoever. A priori truths, for the non-philosophy people, that means things that are true, which you can know without experiencing them in the real world. There was this big thing of a posteriori truths and a priori truths, which is empiricism, like empirical data, which in an argument, oh, you need empirical data. But in philosophy time, empiricism is not what you want. You want to know, if you want to prove something, you got to know it for sure with certainty. And if you only know something after doing an experiment, then that's not knowing something for certain. Empirical truths have a sort of, I don't know, just baggage you don't want to deal with if you're just trying to do logic. So you stick mostly to a priori truths. So a priori truths, something that you can have in your intellect without having to experience it. You can just know immediately from your brain. I kind of have some weird ideas about like whether or not any of these exist. Classic examples of something that everybody says are a priori is math, numbers, and that you exist. Descartes proved that. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. That's something that that is true. Just in thinking it, you prove it true. In thinking that it is not true, you prove it to be true. It's unable to be contradicted. Some people have tried, but, you know, whatever. We'll accept it. We'll accept it, Descartes. Yeah. Math, though, I don't really think math is a priori. Math has to do with quantities. Invariably, it has to do with quantities. And you can't have quantities without experiencing physical reality or not even physical reality. Let's say we're thinking things floating around in a something, in a purely noumenal world. That's a Kantian word. That's like metaphysical, all right? We're souls floating around in a nothing world, okay? If we have no like psychic way of communicating with each other, then there's no way that we're going to know that another thing exists. And probably in all like versions of like psychological frameworks of how to understand the self, there's the self and there's the other. And the other can be anything. That kind of changes based on what you're trying to think about, but there has to be an other. And you only know that you exist given that there is a something that could not exist. So if this guy has no other, then there's nothing to quantify. So he can't even think of numbers. Numbers are like this immortal. In the Renaissance, it's like, oh, math and science are so interesting and they're so important. They're a priori because they don't exist in this world, but we all know they exist. But and it's not more so like numbers exist. It's that they are true. Like 1 + 1 = 2. That is true invariably a priori. You don't have to experience the equation to know that that's true, so the argument goes. But you have to experience that one is a thing that means something, not even just linguistically, but like in your head, the way that you intuit things. You have to know that there is a one that is different from a two, and that one is different from another one, that you can add them into two. And for that, you have to have an other. And so it has to be a posteriori. A posteriori. A posteriori. So imagine a thinking thing that has no physical reality to experience, and it also has no metaphysical reality that it has access to. It's not going to think anything. It exists, you know, in the prerequisite for our proposition here, but there's no knowledge that it could ever attain. It's only through non-solipsism, through communicating with another existing thing, that it'll know anything. And what I've just said falls directly in line with the knowledge being on a need-to-know basis type thing. Because that guy who has no contact with anything, he doesn't need to know anything, because there's, I don't know, there's nothing. Maybe he needs to know something. Maybe God just forgot to sow this guy into the universe. So he needs to be saved, but he doesn't even have a concept of quantity. Yeah, he doesn't even have a concept of the other. So even if he needs to know something, my point is that you have to assume certain things in order to know that knowledge has meaning. You have to assume that other things exist in order to have numbers mean anything. You have to have the experience that some other thing exists. So actually, guys, all knowledge is empirical and thus falls onto my need-to-know basis thing. So that one was for the guys who know a little something. Back to the video. Your book smarts aren't that useful. So your book smarts kind of depend on what book you read. And books are wrong sometimes. And that's where, like, learning comes from. Everyone wants to learn more because they always want to check if they're right. You know, that's kind of what science is about. You have some book smarts, you have some guess that you make through either wisdom or intelligence, through book smarts or street smarts. And I have this guess about the world, and now my job as a scientist is to go find out if it's wrong or not. For science, maybe smarts are useful then, because you need to have something to base this off of. I used the example in the last video where you don't want a doctor who got an A for using ChatGPT. You want a doctor to have some book smarts. And probably also, it's better if your doctor has some street smarts from being a doctor. Like, they've done surgeries before, so now they know how to do a surgery. Smarts are useful then, all right? But what if you're not a doctor? Smarts are kind of only useful in the craft that the knowledge is relevant to. So a doctor doesn't really need to know anything about farming. And a farmer doesn't need to know anything about being a doctor relevant to their occupation. Maybe it's convenient if they're in a first aid situation. It'd be maybe nice if a doctor could cast a broken bone. But is it going to be all that relevant for the majority of their life? No. In school as it exists right now, we kind of unilaterally say that being smart is good, always. And we kind of do away with, A, the distinction between wisdom and intelligence, and B, the categories in which either one might fall, like farming or being a doctor. But practically, in the real world, if you're a doctor and you know more about farming, the farming stuff is kind of just cluttering up your brain, and it's probably going to be harder to learn doctoring. Especially if you have all this more life experience being a farmer than a doctor, you're going to go about things thinking one way. Imagine if you are coding in Java and then you start coding in JavaScript. It's a little different, guys. And knowing something so similar is probably going to cloud your judgment on what you should do in JavaScript, if you know Java. Being smart unilaterally is pretty usually, like I said, treated as important. But actually, it's not that important. It does matter what you're going to do with it. It matters what your goals are. Because there's only so much time in your life. And if all of your smarts, like I said earlier, can get destroyed in an instant if you read the wrong book or if you live the wrong life relevant to where you're going next, then what does it matter? You're kind of just wasting your time trying to get all the smarts. And that's why I say that school isn't that important, because probably before middle school or at the middle school age, when you're learning like algebra and stuff, if you're going to be working at McDonald's for the rest of your life, you really don't need algebra. You definitely don't need Shakespeare. And it's sure it'd be nice if you knew Shakespeare, I guess, but it's not going to be relevant at all. And that's where, I don't know, Shakespeare's art, so it's maybe people might think it's a little different. But usually in school, we really don't treat art with any specialty. It's just another form of knowing that you got to know to succeed in the school system. I think that sort of attempted unilateral appreciation of all the types of knowledge there are across the board is kind of not great.
You think it's a coincidence that they have 6 subjects out of 10 billion that they teach in school?
And then
That's
you
just
pick one of the
arbitrary.
10 billion to focus on.
No, you have to.
You
they
need
don't
basic
teach you 10
math.
billion.
It's kind of just a waste of time. And already, people already don't like it. When I was a kid in school, I didn't really want to be there, especially as the classes go on. And you're like, all right, when is this going to be important? I remember kids asking that all the time, especially in middle school. That's when people started to ask that, when am I going to need to know this? When is this going to be important? And the answer is not at all, unless you're trying to go for those minority positions like doctor, where you need to know doctoring. If we have no teachers already because there's a teaching crisis and all the teachers are bad anyway, so you're not learning what you're supposedly supposed to be knowing anyway, then why even bother with the pretension? Why not just get rid of the mandatory schooling system? And if you think wisdom is more important than intelligence, that's living, and the knowledge you get from that is more important than the knowledge you get from a book, which for some reason a lot of people seem to think that. I think people only want to think that so that way they have a justification to not read. But if you think that, then you should be absolutely all for getting rid of the mandatory school system and let people live more than read. And either way, if you encourage people to live more than be at school, that doesn't mean that they suddenly stop learning. This was another thing that the commenter put. They had this long thing about, like, you never stop learning and it's so important to keep learning. Just because you're not in school doesn't mean you stop learning. Of course not. You learn new things every day by living and also by reading extracurricular things that are not in school. Most of the things I know are not from school, especially with the internet where everything is costs a whole lot less. If you live in a town with a public library which has a computer, and the library has books there too, also, I might add, you can just go there. You can live a normal life full of more joy, more personal freedom, and probably also, more wealth. You can work at 14, which is in middle school. So why not just cut it off there? Why not just start your life there? And that's another thing, even in the verbalities of a middle schooler, there's a distinction made, even an elementary schooler, there's a distinction made between real life and school. Why do we want to keep people outside of the real life for so long? With a website like Wikipedia, you can just go on there and learn thousands of years of history, condensed, maybe not condensed. Scroll down to the references, find the primary sources, read it less condensed. And you can get all this knowledge for free. Free. The only thing you have to pay for is computer access. And if you live in a place with a public library, all you're paying is taxes for that. So this isn't even an anti-government solution that I have, getting rid of the Department of Education and cutting back the year that you graduate. It's not even anti-government. It's just anti this particular inefficient part of government. And that's another point that the commenter made. The commenter said that there's going to be rampant anti-intellectualism without the Department of Education. Where is there rampant intellectualism right now that getting rid of the Department of Education will create the inverse? Nothing's going to change. Nothing ever changes. I don't really think that people are suddenly going to become inherently less smart just because there's less standardizing. Teaching probably does more harm to motivations to learn than if someone was just on their own. It tries to teach you about like research and like, writing what you care about, but I think a majority of people don't want to write in the first place, so I don't think school motivates them to write about what they care about. The Department of Education doesn't incentivize motivation such that people are going to be motivated to learn outside of the schooling system. And they're definitely not being motivated to learn inside the schooling system. So why not just try it without? Why not just give it a go? If you're only motivated to learn, you can learn anything. If you have time and motivation, you can just immediately learn anything. Maybe there's some type of socialist point to be made about how, like, if people aren't in school, then they'll have their labor is going to be worth less, so then they'll be paid less, so then they'll have less time to learn. But imagine the inverse. There's more schooling and more standardization. Now we're in school all the time. When are we going to have time to get money? And if there's more standardization, then that means that's more standardization means less free-flowing motivation-based learning. Unless your standard is being motivated, in which case, guess what? Everyone's going to fail. But like if you keep the Department of Education and you keep high standards for graduation, then and you increase the standards. Back in the day, to graduate high school, you had to know calculus and you had to know Greek and Latin. If we did that today, it's just not going to work out. People aren't going to want to learn Greek and Latin and calculus. So as a result, because you can't stop the machine of the schooling system, you kind of just have to pass them anyway. You have to lower the standards in practical reality and keep the standards high on paper. So that way everyone apparently knows Greek and Latin, and then, after high school, they're going to forget it immediately. And the Greek and Latin classes are probably, just going to be crap because everyone has to take them, including the bad kids. Homogenizing everything and making everyone do everything is just going to push the bar to the point where the lowest person can reach it. It doesn't suddenly make the people who want to learn more, because the people who want to learn are already learning. The people who don't want to learn should be the focus of teaching, like I said in the other video. And it's just so hard to make them want to learn. You're not going to do it through school. I feel like you're going to do it by dealing them a worse hand by making them live, and then suddenly they'll realize, oh wait, I'm 17, I have a job, and I don't go to school. If your life isn't busy with social life, then you probably want to learn then. You have to show people the negatives of what they want before they realize, oh wait, let me go do the thing they wanted me to do. The commenter said something about how privatizing schools isn't going to make education better. I didn't really say that. We should still have public schools. People should just graduate earlier, and there should be, less standards for them, because in life, there's less standards anyway. Especially the postmodern way things are going. There's zero standards on how you should live. And whether that should be that way or not, our schooling system should probably match that. There should be probably less standards. Just so that way everything in the culture is on the same page, all right? So that way our culture makes a little more sense. And I'm not endorsing the private sector. Either way, the private sector, Wikipedia is from the private sector. The government did not invent Wikipedia, and I don't think they ever could. Wikipedia is like a passion project. People that actually care about learning and collecting data. That's who works at Wikipedia. And there are teachers in public schools that actually do care about like teaching people. I'm not saying in the other video that every teacher is bad. I'm saying that there exist a lot of bad teachers, and they're made that way because of the current schooling system. And I make a plea to the unimpassioned ones to quit. So that way the range of who is a teacher is selected to be only the people who are passionate about it. I don't really think it matters if you're in the private or the public sector. As long as you care about it, I think then you should be able to, you should do something about it. As it exists now, people who end up getting stuck in the public sector just end up bringing the whole operation down. If knowledge is only important, relevant to your categorical occupation, then what is being smart? Because I did say in the other video that there were such a thing as smart teachers. I did not say, by the way, that I was smart. That is not a thing I said. There is one section where I describe myself in the 3rd grade, and I mentioned that I was spiritually affected to already know that what was in the course material. That's not the same thing as being smart. That just means you already know what 3rd grade was going to teach you. That's not anything. That should be par for the course. 3rd grade shouldn't be hard. You probably should be raising your hand in 3rd grade. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But so just putting it out there. I did not say that I was smart. All right. But I did say that teachers were smart. Roll the clip that people have, which is that's how they learned. So that's how they expect other people to learn. And you get this with teachers who are smart, because there are teachers who are dumb. And teachers who are dumb usually do the other extreme, which is the PowerPoint thing. So obviously I think that some sort of smartness exists that is not only relevant to your categorical occupation, especially a teacher whose categorical occupation is everything. So there obviously has to be some sort of smartness that I think exists. Smartness, in the only way that it's worth talking about, is not knowledge, because like I said earlier, you can immediately be proved wrong on anything, whether it's from a book or from your life. But what kind of is always useful in no matter what category you're in is like processing knowledge and having systemic ways of approaching problems and sorting data. Data being, I don't know, the stuff you learn, knowledge. And if you have that, then you can learn anything, and it won't matter what category it's in, which is why that completely supersedes facts. Facts. It's such a useless thing. The sky is blue, and then you'd wait, it's nighttime now, the sky is black. Like, things change all the time. Knowing something, especially a time-stamped something, is so useless. It's so useless. It doesn't matter. I have a green screen behind me right now. Do you think it matters that I can make the green screen work in the editing software? It's important, as is relevant for my hobby of making videos, but it's not actually any cosmically important. And we probably should be discussing cosmically important things, right? If we're talking about what's important, we should probably go to the highest level of importance possible, which is cosmic. And it especially should be relevant as in like moral. Like, do you have a moral obligation to know facts? No, they change all the time. It would be ridiculous to expect everyone to know facts. Ugh, schools. Okay, back to my original point. So these ways of systemizing things, so obviously much more important. You can grab any fact in the whole world, and as long as you have a system to put it in and you know what its worth should be, then you're smart. So what was I saying about the teachers who were smart? What I said in the video is that they were motivated to learn. A prerequisite for being motivated to do most things is that it's easy. So what I was saying about smart teachers is that they are teachers who find it easy to learn. And that's why they make their classrooms a playground where you're supposed to learn anything you want to, because they assume people are like themselves and that their students want to learn. And this is not true of everybody. Now, it is possible, and it could be possible to create a world where everyone is like this. It's possible where someone can be motivated to learn something and finds it difficult to learn, but that's not the smartest way to go about it. The smartest way to go about it is to make a framework, a mental framework where it's easy to learn. And then from there, it doesn't matter what situation you're in. You can always pretty much make the best of it. Meanwhile, if it's hard to learn and you immediately turn down any sort of progress that might come your way, I'm sorry, I don't really think you're smart. And should that be a good thing? Should that be a bad thing? I kind of just went on a whole rant about how it doesn't really matter if you're smart or not, mostly for your practical life. So if you're a farmer and you think it's hard to learn things, and because of that you don't want to be a doctor, whatever. Who cares? Just be a farmer then. Just be a farmer and be a good person. Like, it doesn't matter if you're smart. Just do your job. So I think that's the video. Oh, and there was some comment about how I was copying right-wing dog whistles by saying we should get rid of the Department of Education. What part of either of these videos was political enough to say that I'm a right-wing dog whistle guy? What do you... I went on for... The last video was 30 minutes long, but I had recorded it for an hour. I've been recording this one for 37 minutes. I don't think I mentioned either political party once. I definitely did not mention either political party once. I wanted to get rid of the Department of Education and change education around for very different reasons than right-wingers. It's a very different system. I still think it should be done, and if Trump really does it, I'm interested to see where the world will go because I want it to be done. But just to mix it up a little bit, you know. But it's not a right-wing dog whistle. Why would a right-wing dog whistle be loudly proclaiming to do the thing the right-wingers want to do? That's not a dog whistle. A dog whistle is like the 3 parentheses thing, where people who don't know about it don't know you're a right-winger. Everyone knows Trump wants to get rid of the Department of Education. Anyone that's been paying attention. And if you haven't been, I said in the video that it was a right-wing thing to do. I'm not saying that a thing I want to have happen is the same thing that some right-wingers want to have happen. That's not a dog whistle. All right. I've spoken enough.